Let me ask each of our panelists, this would be a basic yes or no question, whether or not you support or oppose the Preconception and Pre-Diagnostic Techniques Act of 1994 or the PND Act.
You'd have to remind me, I'm sorry.
Sex selection abortion ban.
Oh,
in India.
Yeah, of course I would support it, yes.
You support the act?
Yes.
I just want to get on the record.
Yeah.
Yes.
So let's be very clear. Prenatal Diagnostic Techniques Act. The focus of the act is on the act of determination,
Right.
not on the
Right.
So let's be very clear. Here also at this level, the focus of the act is on stopping determination because the act sees sex selection as discrimination. So it is. We are not dealing with abortion.
So sex selection abortion is not proscribed in India?
Determination of the fetus.
No, but please, so we know absolutely. Is there a law in India that says it's illegal to have a sex selection abortion?
No. What it says, no, what the law, PNDT Act, what you mentioned,
Yes.
is against discrimination. It talks about not just it focuses on determination of sex. So it could be the fetal sex, it could be the embryo sex, it could be the preconceptional sex. So determination, because we also have a law, MTP, medical termination of pregnancy, which makes it legal. So the focus of our law is preventing discrimination. So it is not sex selective abortion.
When you determine the sex of your child, and then you determine that she is a female, and then go have an abortion, that is illegal because you have broken the act in determining the sex of the child. And so, yes, I'm in favor of this act.
Yes, in favor.
Let me ask Dr. Connolly, can you expand on the role USAID historically played in coercive population control programs in India? You mentioned Australia's aid agency in your written report, what they do. And what about those other countries such as Sweden, SIDA, and maybe other countries too, if you want to touch on
Well, USAID played an enormous role in funding population control. In the 1970s, USAID provided more international aid for family planning, so-called, than the rest of the world put together. That said, USAID, unlike, say, Sweden, for instance, and a number of other foreign aid agencies, didn't provide money for incentives for sterilization payments. On the other hand, now I've got three hands. The head of
Dr. Connolly, on the coercive side of it all.
Right. On the coercive side, well, for me, paying poor people who are hungry for sterilization is coercion.
We did that in India.
No, actually, USAID did not do that. They did, on the other hand, pay for incentive payments for the providers to carry out these procedures, which, as you can imagine, is rife for abuse.
Historically, were all populations and castes targeted for population control? Were the Dalits, for example, singled out for more abusive treatment?
That's a matter, of great controversy, continuing controversy. If you look at the statistics, from the emergency period, for instance, it does seem that the Dalits were singled out. Whether this was because they were often the poorest and most disenfranchised, or whether it was because they're Dalits, that part is not clear.
Without objection, testimony submitted by Mira Wiesenstahl will be made a part of the record. She couldn't be here today, but wrote an extensive submission for this subcommittee. She points out in her testimony that sex-selective abortion following ultrasound scans is by far the most common means of sex selection worldwide. Do you agree with that?
I don't know that I can verify that about the present, but to my knowledge, that's consistent with what I've seen.
Dr. George?
Yes, sir. Now, if you look at, India is a big country. If you look at China also, there are regional differences. So, sexing started extensively in the private sector in Punjab in 1979. So, when you look at many other parts of India, southern India, eastern India, the sex selection started later. If you look at my state of Kerala, for instance, even 10 years ago, where the rate of ultrasound usage was the highest in pregnancy, hardly any misuse was being done for sex determination. But in recent years, we are seeing, so it depends on when the sexing started, so when the ratios fall. So therefore, the whole country we cannot say, but what I'm saying is that it depends on where you're looking. So if you're looking at Punjab, Delhi, Haryana, yes, you're right. Sex determination, it becomes the most important cause where post-child neglect is much less, where infanticide is much less. So what I'm trying to say is that in 1981, I came to the US to study nutrition because we saw malnutrition, girl child malnutrition as big problems. Those days, the sexing was very little, infanticide was very little, but today we see that as sexing becomes more and more of the norm, then these things become very different.
In the studies that I have done through our work, you can see the gender ratio dropping every 10 years in the census. I believe in 2001, between ages of 0 and 6, the girl to boy ratio was 927 to 1,000 boys. In the 2011 census, it's 914 girls to 1,000 boys. And that's, once again, the ages of 0 to 6. And through experts in this field in India, they say that this is a direct product of sex determination through ultrasound, and that is becoming much more prevalent. Now, granted, in our work, we deal with a lot of people who are very, very poor and who cannot afford the sex determination test through ultrasound. And so they are still committing infanticide. And these are people in the rural villages of India. But when people can afford it, they will have sex determination tests done through ultrasound. And they will choose to abort their children, their daughters, because of what they've learned in ultrasound.
I'm afraid I really have to look at the numbers. I mean, I've kind of lost a little bit of the track of what we're saying.
Her question,
yes
or
to.
her
Sorry.
declarative sentence was, sex-selective abortion following ultrasound scans is by far the most common means of sex selection worldwide. Do you agree with that?
I really don't. I would really have to look at the numbers. I don't know.
Do that and get back to us for the record. That would be appreciated.
Sure.
She also points out that there has been a spike in trafficking, prostitution, and bride selling in India as an after effect of sex selection abortions and sex selection in general. Mr. Weber just left. He wrote the law in Texas on combating sex trafficking. My good friend and colleague, Mr. Marino, enforced it as the U.S. attorney, enforced my law because I wrote the Trafficking Victims Protection Act of 2000. We have tried for years to get the U.S. Department of State to focus both on China and India, that there is a nexus between the two. Finally, this year, the administration, and I credit Lucy DeBacca for the ambassador at large for being dogged in trying to ensure that this connection be made. The Trafficking in Persons report for this year, announced in June, and I was at the announcement with Secretary of State John Kerry, made it absolutely clear that this is a major factor in what is becoming an outrageous phenomenon of commodifying women and selling them, because there is a dearth of women. They've been exterminated systematically through sex selection abortion. We have not had a corresponding acceptance of that notion in India. And I'm wondering if any of you could shed light on, you know, as Ms. Wiesenthal points out, you know, she has a whole section on human trafficking and points out that India's impoverished Northeast is a common source of trafficked women, and of course the lack of women, of course, leads to more bride selling and trafficking. Is it your view that, I mean, we're not here to talk about China, but is it your view, or would any of you like to take a stab at the issue of trafficking and sex selection abortion and sex selection in general leading to an exacerbated situation?
You know, I started working on the issue of trafficking and forced prostitution in India in 1982. And I actually did my senior thesis in college at Mount Holyoke on the subject. And at that time, there was very little attention being placed on the issue of trafficking. And one was also looking at the phenomenon of mail order brides to the United States from various Southeast Asian countries, and returning GIs and soldiers marrying women and bringing them back. And So, my experience with the issue of trafficking and forced prostitution goes back, obviously, several decades. And I'm not entirely sure that I would be willing to say that there is a cause and effect relationship between gender biased sex selection and trafficking in women and girls, because my work on that started a long time ago, and the current statistics on that situation did not exist then. I think that the issue of gender biased sex selection and trafficking in women and girls are both manifestations of gender based discrimination, which has multiple roles, as we've discussed earlier in the testimony. And I think to make the connection, this direct causal relationship between gender biased sex selection and trafficking, of course, the unequal sex ratio is leading to other kinds of consequences. But to say that this is a consequence of that rather than underlying patriarchy and gender-based discrimination, I think is incorrect.
With all due respect, you would disagree with the U.S. Department of State's finding that it is a cause of sex trafficking. The absence of women and
I don't think it's a cause. I think that the problem is gender-based discrimination and the objectification of women, and the fact that men are not raised to look at women and girls differently. I think the problem really is how men view women, if we really want to talk about the causes of the problems that we're facing today.
But with skewed ratios and the absence of women to marry, and again, both India and China have enormously skewed ratios. Others are joining those ranks, not quite as much so. You don't believe that leads to entrepreneurs, nefarious entrepreneurs at that, who turn women into commodities and buy and certainly sell them.
The trafficking industry uses whatever factors it can. It uses
We're
poverty.
talking about a dearth of women who then...
Well, that is one of many, many factors. To say there's a causal relationship between one and the other, and to ignore patriarchy and gender-based discrimination...
Who's ignoring? That's a straw man's argument. I'm not ignoring any other issues. What I'm suggesting is that when the women don't exist because they've been systematically exterminated through sex selection, abortion, and again, Ms. Wiesenstahl points out that that is by far the largest cause of the missing girls worldwide. It certainly leads to people looking for women who don't exist, and then in come the pimps who sell these women to the nearest buyer. Ms.
but trafficking
if you could speak to
existed
that.
before that.
I'm out of time almost. Oh, of course it's gotten worse, demonstrably worse. Again, I wrote that law. Finally, the State Department has recognized it, and we're hoping they'll recognize it vis-a-vis India, and they have not yet.
Thank you, Chairman Smith. As I wrote in my statement, and I touched on briefly today in my oral statement before the committee, yes, you can see a correlation. There is, because there are 37 million men who will never find wives, there has to be a result, and the result is trafficking. Studies show trafficking, violence against women, marrying of child brides. The percentage of young girls who get married in India, it's 47% below the age of 18 who are married off to these men because they're looking for women to marry. And so there is a correlation. I mean, I think that you have to recognize that trafficking is a result of what is going on in this discrimination against girls and women through sex-selective abortion, through infanticide, through feticide.
Well, to borrow an inconvenient or someone else's word, it is an inconvenient truth, in my opinion. It is almost as plain as the nose of my face that when the women don't exist because they've been exterminated in utero, that men who are looking for a woman, unfortunately, are more easily susceptible to those, again, nefarious networks of pimps who sell them. Dr. Conley, do you want to speak on that?
Well, one thing I know about trafficking is that it's notoriously difficult to get accurate statistics. One thing about sex ratios is that we have very good data. These are vital statistics, and so we can keep close track of it and track the change over time. Whereas reporting on sex trafficking is a statistician's nightmare. So it's a little hard, to verify a causal relationship between the two.
Well, it took the State Department a long time on China,
Mm-hmm.
but they finally have come to that conclusion, and again, it's in their most recent report, and the Obama administration absolutely does not agree with my view on the sanctity of an unborn child's life, but nevertheless they came to that conclusion that there is a nexus between the two. I want to thank all of you for your testimony. I think it's been a very spirited and I think robust discussion. It's not the end of it. I do believe that violence against the unborn child or the newborn child, who happens to be female or anyone else, cries out for protection. It is human rights are nothing if they're not for all. You know, and so again, Ms. Dutt, I would respectfully disagree with you on your view, but I do believe passionately that abortion is violence against children and it is injurious to women. And again, it has made this issue of missing girls demonstrably worse, and that's, I think, a matter of statistics that are unassailable. Thank you so much for your testimony. I am going to try to make that vote, which I may have missed. I really appreciate your providing the insights that you have today. Hearing is adjourned.